In 1610, Ben Jonson wrote a play called The Alchemist. In 1989, Doctor Who was cancelled. Coincidence? Hello and welcome to the Beyond Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Crighton, and I am joined by a couple of wonderful guests to discuss the play, The Alchemist by Ben Jonson, and Creation Theatre Company that have produced it recently. In fact, if you're listening to this as it goes out, you can go out and buy tickets and see the show. If you are listening to this in the future, beyond 2023, you can't. It's in the past. Tough, but hopefully you're listening to this as it goes out, and you are able to catch the limited tickets that are still available, because I'm sure it's selling fairly well, and those chances are slipping out of your fingers. But even as I'm speaking, I am taking go book now, because by the time I finish this sentence, they might all have gone. So joining me today are a couple of members of the production team. Asking you now, who are you and what is your purpose in life?
I think we should leave that back, don't you, Katie? I think we should just call it quits.
Absolutely. So I am Katie Blackwell. I'm one of the producers at Creation Theatre, currently working on The Alchemist, bringing The Alchemist to the Maths Institute in Oxford, and very shortly to a very exciting art gallery in London. So yes.
And my name's Anna Tolputt, and I am a member of the Creation Theatre Company Rep Company, and have directed The Alchemist.
So, starting, I think, with Katie to say, who are Creation Theatre? Who are you, as it were? How did you come about, and where are you now?
Absolutely. So Creation Theatre is Oxford's leading theatre producing company. We've been around since 1996, creating site-specific adaptations of classic works of literature and plays. And we are also leaders in digital theatre and site-specific theatre. So we do shows in unusual places. We make incredible adaptations in bizarre locations, which is why we are in the absolutely fascinating and unique space that is the Common Room in the Maths Institute in Oxford. If anyone knows the space, they know that it is beautiful and certainly unique. And the perfect place to be Lovewit's penthouse in The Alchemist.
Yes, so you've decided to put on this particular play. Was there a sort of logic that drove you towards this text, or was it badgering from a director, say, or was it coming from the company side of things?
I've got to take that one. I think it was born, as it's often born, in the course of about 3 minutes conversation. Charlie, one of our producers, phoned and said that we had a slot to do some R&D, and would I like to do some R&D on a show? And we are 4 members of the Rep Company, 2 women, 2 men, and obviously I was out of the picture because I would be directing. And on the spot, I had to think of something that was out of copyright, that had been written by a dead person and could potentially get an audience, and that had 1 woman and 2 men in the leads. And this was the thing that popped into my head. And what I should have done is say, can I go away and think about it for a couple of weeks? And in fact, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to try and do it? At the time, I was going to try and do The Alchemist with 3 people and see if that was possible. We ended up with 5 and discovered that it isn't possible at the same time. Yeah.
No, The Alchemist is structurally actually very doubleable. There are only 12 named parts in the script overall. That was my quick scan, and the core company is very tight, and of course they sort of have. Contradict me if I'm wrong, but it's a con. It's all about early modern con artistry, of which we have touched on quite a few times on the podcast and in our Patreon feed, looking at coney catching pamphlets and similar. So these things don't change. So in the sense, you have the con artists, and then you have their marks. That's sort of the structure of the play, isn't it?
Yes. Although it turns out that it's very hard to have a con artist on stage with themselves which happens less than it would have done if I'd gone with the original idea. But we definitely have situations where 2 or 3 people are on stage with themselves at any one point. So we found ways around that, which we'll go on to, I'm sure.
Yes. So, having decided to do it, and wanting to do it, we were talking off camera just beforehand about the intentions and the ideas that you may have come up with originally, and then what happened in the process of production. What sort of production schedule do you have for this kind of show?
Yeah, I mean, I want to sort of say, despite my glib response to your first question, I mean, it's always been on my radar as a play that I'd like to revisit. And I have a real affection for the play. And obviously one of the things that I really love about it, which I'm sure is everybody's favourite thing, is the language. And that sense that it's got this sort of edgy street dialect to it that sort of reminds me of the poetry in The Wire, that, it feels very, bits of it feel absolutely modern, but like it's modern, but in a sort of street modern way. So for that reason and for practicality, I decided I wanted to set it in not quite modern times, but a sort of heightened modern setting. Also because I wanted to sort of slightly give a nod to the fact that we are now in a situation where we understand what a pandemic looks like, and I don't believe it's been done since the pandemic, or not in a way that I'm aware of. And so it just felt like it was the right time, really. So we set it in a penthouse, with the sense, and we had one of the practical things was we use intercoms a lot, so people can be on stage with themselves at the same time, and also it helps with creating, the sense of the build of the piece, which of course is so important in a farce. Ways in which it's sort of ways in which the production, obviously you start directing something like this, and then you bring on the creative team and you hope that they'll run with your ideas, but basically they'll bring their own ideas in and make it better and embellish and all that. So you're always dealing with things changing as you go along. But when you're dealing also with a particular site that is not a theatre space, you've got a whole other element which can sometimes just, rip up your ideas and throw them in the bin. So we discovered, halfway through this rehearsal process, we discovered that the lights in the Mass Institute don't turn off at all. unless you stay still for 15 minutes, and then they will. So we did discuss for a while that this could be a farce where suddenly in the middle of it, everybody sat still for 15 minutes. But we weren't quite sure how we were going to get the audience to do that as well. So having had this sort of vision of, special effects and explosions and walls lighting up, and having a wonderful lighting designer on board to sort of produce all this, we suddenly were in a situation where that all had to be abandoned. And, at the time it feels kind of gutting, but then you just make a different play. And in fact, I'm incredibly proud of what's happened as a result of that. I feel like we've ended up with a sort of street theatre performance of Jonson, which actually brings it alive in a really lovely way. So the audience really are sitting in the penthouse with the 3 con artists, and they're constantly being made to hold bits of costume, and things are happening around the back of the audience. People are entering, so it feels very, very immersive. And the audience start off, I think, feeling pretty conscious of the fact that they can see each other, and by the end they're just completely involved and unaware. So I think that's the main thing that perhaps changed from the original concept.
Well, it's one of those advantages especially for a comedy, is actually a shared light condition is actually it does encourage more laughter. It's a generalization, but it is one of those elements, and it also speaks to a degree to original practices. If this was performed at the Globe, for example, rather than just in Blackfriars, where some lighting effects are possible, that sort of shared light condition is actually sort of authentic. And as you alluded to, the play is set during a plague, and of course we are the first generation in quite a long time to have actually lived through that kind of analogue of the condition that that Jonson and everyone watching the play then would have actually had. So I think that resonance would be very, very interesting, actually.
Yeah, we tried to touch on it lightly. You go down journeys with these things, and I started off changing loads of references and making it sort of trying to make it quite political, and of course it's disastrous and awful when you do that. So we end up pulling right back. So you do, I mean, it's there if you want it. A couple of characters come in and face masks, and how can you talk about a plague really now without being immediately thinking of that, particularly when people are in vaguely modern outfits, which they are. Sort of ultra heist is the vibe that we're going for.
Yes, and so it's because it's Jonson. It's quite a chunky text. There are a lot of textual decisions that you need to make, and you were talking about that nature of the dialect and the language, because he's talking to the language of the time, and there are analogues, but there are also things that are quite distinctly weird. And where do you find the balance there in terms of keeping the clarity but also keeping the edginess of the original without the audience going as it were?
Yeah, completely. And so much of some of the characters are very verbose, and that's absolutely who they are. Mammon goes off on one, and it just seemed wrong to change that. That's who he is, and it's part of the comedy. Probably my most nerve-wracking point of the whole process was the first read through, knowing that at 90 minutes I was going to be getting a very hard stare from the creation producer. She was, the belief is that, well, first of all, creation work in this sort of quite punchy, quite fast sort of medium, but also once you're insight specific, it's just a little bit harder to sustain an audience interest, over 3 hours and 20 or whatever the play would have been. So I reckon I probably cut about 50% in the end, which is a huge shame. Every line, you grieve every line, but I think it does make for a slicker, much more accessible watch. I started very sadly by saying, well, is there one character that we really find difficult to relate to? And I'm sure you can guess which one that was. So sadly, Tribulation and Ananias got a great big chop. Although I felt like I had to keep Ananias for the build because he's so much a part of the madness at the end. So he comes in really quite randomly as a priest partway through the play. Does a little dance and then disappears, and we see him again, shouting fire and brimstone down, right at the end. So he's a very significant character. But yes, I've completely chopped him, and Tribulation's gone completely. And then my sort of, I guess I took out anything that wasn't immediately furthering the plot. As long as it didn't affect too much, in my opinion, the character. Of course, it's all going to have an effect. The other thing that's so tricky is that the play is so intricately structured. It's such an absolute masterpiece of structuring that actually, as soon as you cut anything, you're going, oh God, this has a knock-on effect, 4 scenes down, it's, and what's the rhythm going to be like? I was never quite sure until we were in performance whether the rhythm would be right or whether I completely killed it dead through cuts. In terms of sort of update, I did change some lines, but very, very, I tried to be really cautious, that's wrong. I tried to be very sparse about that. I think my rule was, if changing a word will help sell the joke, then it's valid. But sometimes changing a word would just allow it to bridge to our time in a way that I thought was really helpful. And actually often, so we have, one time, I don't know if you remember the bit. Can I still be heard, by the way?
Yes, no, you can still be heard.
Yeah, the script's gone. Not there, no accents. So there's a part in the script where he will be a very good distiller. I think Subtle says about drugger. He's. And I just changed it to expand into skincare products, partly because I just felt like we know this is a part we don't really relate to the idea of alchemy and selling that dream, but we do relate to the idea of selling the dream of really expensive skincare products that come in pipettes and will transform your face, or your Prime energy drink that an influencer has promoted on the internet, which is now costing £15 apparently, for just a can of pop. And we get that, and we love that. We love being seduced by stuff like that. It's almost worth paying 15 quid, because you know that you've just paid 15 quid, and isn't that lovely? Because now you've got a really expensive I feel like it's not just being duped. In a sense, we're part of that being duped, and I really wanted that to come into I really wanted to make a nod to that in The Alchemist. So a couple of times I've taken liberties with the text in that way.
Yes, we've been recently reading. I say recently, for those listening to the podcast, you will be able to see this in about a year's time. The Devil is an Ass, also by Ben Jonson,
Yes.
which similarly features. They're not so much overt con artists; they're speculators. So they're con artists, and so there's a lengthy thing there about cosmetics, where they're talking about selling this fucus or Fucus, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is a fun ongoing gag. And again, that verbosity, this thing about patter, which is this attack, and also that question of structure and cutting. So anyone listening here going, oh, you should never cut plays, you should leave plays. These plays are structurally too long. And that's a Ben Jonson thing of the texts that we get are often longer than a performance text, because that's what Ben Jonson did. He gave us the director's cut of his scripts. And in some cases, that isn't just a 3-hour play, that's a 5-hour play. There's a lot of material, and producers have to make these decisions. And often these decisions are very similar. So we were looking at Devil is an Ass, which is about the same length, if not longer than this play. And the question we're constantly asking is, okay, what can we do to remove and shorten without destroying the structure? Because you're absolutely right. Ben Jonson has a very clear idea of structure. And if you tamper with that at your peril, especially if it's designed for an indoor playhouse, then those act structures are also units of action that are very important to understand how they work of themselves, as well as how they then link to the next bit of the chain. So for anyone out there doing any Jonson, these are all the conversations you will inevitably happen, unless you're doing the cases altered, which is pretty straightforward. It's really short. You just pull it on. It's fine. Because it's an early play, and he didn't muck around with it later in his life. It survived getting burnt. So this is one of those texts where we've got, and you're right, it's so hard to remove, because you're going, there are so many variations sometimes on the same joke as well. So you do sometimes have the option of going, right, which version do I like the best? And if you had the luxury, you could say, well, tonight we're doing this line. That died a death. Shall we try one of the other 5 variations on this joke? Yes.
We absolutely do not have the luxury.
No, I didn't think so. Yes, so I say all of these, everyone, and it's very rare, I think, to see an unaltered on some level Alchemist. I think most modern productions have to make these editorial dramaturgical tweaks, even if they're doing a longer production. There's still this question of how do you get across a decent analog of what's going on. So the show has gone up. I believe. So we were talking about the beginning of the process, your initial thoughts, getting to rehearsal, things that change. How are the audiences responding to it? Are there any surprises?
Well, I haven't seen it since press night. So, Katie, have you seen it since then? Can you give
Yeah.
me?
I was in last night. So the joys of site-specific theatre is that it's a very complicated setup. So it's not like a theatre. We go in, we set up the space, and we pack down the space every evening. So myself and the other producer have been there most nights. He is there every night. And it has been an absolute joy, because that does mean that we get to speak to the audience, and we've had such a range of audience kind of attendees. Sometimes who's what a show, what kind of show will appeal to what kind of audience. So the last show that we did in the Maths Institute was 1984, and Orwell is always going to appeal to, certain types of people, but it's very political, all that kind of stuff. But something like The Alchemist, who knows? We had a lot of queries when it went on sale. Is it the adaptation of the 20th century novel, not the Ben Jonson play? So there's some confusion. There's not quite the same name recognition, but we've had so many students. We've had people who studied it in school. We've had a real range of people attending. We've had there is a kind of an age limit on it. It's not suitable for children, but we have had some teenagers in the audience as well. So it's been really, really well received. People absolutely love it, and people, as Anna mentioned earlier, it does feel like you are in the penthouse because they're all on sofas. They're all it's in the round. So very quickly they find themselves just part of the action, and actually quite often at the interval they come out to the bar, and they're still in that mindset. They're still in that space, which is really nice to see. But it's been very well received.
So you're in one space, you're about to go to another space. Are there sort of anticipatory questions about how that's going to work or function?
I mean, yes. The joy is that they've got us a completely different space. So I haven't yet seen it. I'm going either today or tomorrow, I think, to have a look at it. But I've been reliably informed it's the size of a postage stamp. And the Maths Institute where we're playing at the moment is the size of a huge, it's a huge space. So who knows? I mean, we will just have to roll with it and at least hopefully the actors will know it well by then and will be flexible, be able to be more flexible perhaps than had it happened early on. It's going to be interesting.
It's in a really it's in an art gallery in basically just off Regent Street, and called VO Curations, which is a fantastic space. But it is literally in an art gallery, which is obviously a very different space to either a theatre or the Maths Institute common room. So it's going to be very kind of leaning into that feeling of Lovewit being a member of the kind of London elite, that kind of sense. We'll have to escort the audience through the building to get into the space, and it's extremely limited audience capacity. So tickets are on sale now, but they are also going very, very quickly because it's a very small space. So.
Excellent. So we're keeping this a relatively tight session, as it were. But so this is your moment for the official plugs. Where can we find the show?
Absolutely. So head over to creationtheatre.co.uk and you can find out all about us, but also about where you can get tickets for The Alchemist in Oxford, which is running until this Saturday, Saturday the 21st of October. And then we are in London for a very brief run from the 27th to the 29th of October. As well, and do keep an eye out because we're always doing exciting, unusual shows in the future, even if you do miss The Alchemist.
And any final thoughts you wanted to just say about the play or the process, or who yous are, as it were? Anything you want to throw in before we close?
Well, I think it's worth saying that Creation are I believe the only theatre company in the UK at the moment who have this rep company system, which they started last year. Just when everybody else was cutting down, Creation decided they would employ 4 of us sort of on full-time contracts, and it's been really interesting. It's been so lovely, sort of seeing how that system works and how much it supports the creating of art, how the sort of the complicity between the actors is just so lovely. And I think that's worth saying, isn't it?
And it means that we get people like Anna who are fantastic actors, but also they get a chance to direct and adapt works like The Alchemist, which is so exciting.
Well, those opportunities and all those links will be in the show description. Otherwise, I'm sure a search engine of some description will find these things if you remember keywords. All that remains to thank my wonderful guests for being wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.